Hey guys, Jonno, Proudfoot here. In this little lecture, I am going to be explaining to you how the orange list of the Banting keto diets was assembled and how to use it. Now, before I start, I just want to give you a brief overview of how the keto or Banting food lists were created. And if you want to download a copy, you just click in the link above on Facebook or below if you're watching this on YouTube and download yourself a copy. I'm going to share a screen with you and we're going to go deep into the detail in a second. So the 7 principles that we stuck to when we were putting the Banting list together are, we wanted to make the list easy to use for anyone who wanted to adapt to a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. And so the 7 principles are that we wanted the foods to be low carb, we wanted them to be sugar-free, we wanted them to be gluten-free, and we wanted them to be free of seed oils. Then we wanted to look at the level of processing. So we want people to eat food that is as real as possible. So real whole foods. And so level of processing is like this layer over and above just the ingredients. And then there is the health impact, or what we call the sneakiness. So sometimes foods are unhealthy for other reasons outside of carb content, seed oils, and sugars. So there's this, like dairy and lactose, which I'll get into in a second. And then the final layer or principle in assembling the lists for the keto and Banting diet is practicality. So is it practical to have this food on a certain list? For instance, dried herbs have a very high carb count, but we use very little of them. So do they deserve to be on the red list, or do they deserve to be on the green list? And that's how, so every time we consider an ingredient, and every time you consider which list an ingredient should be on, those are the 7 pillars that you want to look at: carbs, sugar, gluten, seed oils, level of processing, and then like health sneakiness. So is it like fake health or real health, and is it practical? Those are the 7 principles. Now, what I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to show you what these lists look like. And so if you download, you'll get your A4 lists right there. And then in the same download, if you look at the next 2 pages, you get them on each of these 2 pages on A4. So you can print them out like big A3 and stick them on your fridge. And in this talk, we're going to go through the orange list and how to use the orange list and why the ingredients are on the orange list. You could just follow blindly, but I find it's much better if you understand the theory, because then you have more room to play and you can actually just enjoy your food more because you understand what it's doing for you. So the first thing to look at with the orange list is to remember that these lists were created for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to follow the keto diet with. So and diet is not a one size fits all. And so because of that, the lists are very strict, because we want as many people as possible who follow the lists to get the results from the list. So if they were too flexible, then the rules become unclear. And if they were too lenient, then more people would get worse results. So what you'll see is that the lists as they are very strict, but if you work with a coach or a team or a mentor or whatever, you can actually, you have a little more wiggle room with a lot of the ingredients. And the orange list is where a lot of this play and back and forth actually happens. So the first thing you'll see is at the top of the orange list, it says exercise control only 2 of any of the below allocations per day. So it doesn't say per day there, but it's per day. So that means that you can have a 1/4 cup of full fat yogurt and, for instance, 2 cups of coffee from the orange list. And then that's your orange list allocation done for the day. Or you can have a 1/2 cup of lentils and 2 tablespoons of like apricot or banana or figs. Or you can have 1 cup of kombucha and 2 tablespoons of beetroot. That would be all of your orange listed food for the day. And that's why I say it's very strict. And then as you go through your keto journey, you then understand, like, if you do more, does it impact you? Do you actually need to do less? Because even that little amount of carb hits you and it makes a difference. So the first one is obviously nuts. In the first version of the Real Meal Revolution, nuts were actually on the green list, and we recommended snacking with the nuts. But what we found is that people who snacked on nuts ended up snacking throughout the day on nuts, and then they actually didn't lose the weight, even though nuts are a real food and they're a healthy food. So nuts we limit now. Then when it comes to hot drinks, this is the question we get the most often. And caffeine, even though caffeine doesn't have a direct impact on weight loss, caffeine can stress the body, and it can also lead to lack of sleep, especially if you have it in the second half of the day. And we found that people who cut coffee out actually just started losing weight because they were sleeping better, their body was recovering well, and their body wasn't in a stressed state. So that's like an indirect impact on weight loss. And we say we recommend you limit your coffee to 2 cups a day. Of all of the areas on the orange list, I would say that this is almost like a bonus area because it's a drink. So you could have like 2 of all of the other things on the green list, or 2 of any of the other things on the orange list, and coffee. And I would say like that's a free pass. And if coffee doesn't impact you at all and you find you're still getting results and you're losing weight, that's an area where you have some wiggle room for yourself. I'm just going to go down from left to right. So then on the dairy front, in the original version of the Real Meal Revolution, we actually had a lot of dairy on the green list. And what we found was women in particular really battled to lose weight when they eat lots of dairy. So we said you should snack on double thick Greek yogurt. And so what you'll find is some men can do that and get away fine. And some women can actually eat the double thick Greek yogurt and the dairy and still lose weight. But in general, what we found is that when people weren't losing weight, the first thing we would say to them is, hey, cut out dairy and see what happens. And what happens? They'd cut out dairy and they'd all of a sudden start losing weight again. And so instead of putting it on the green list, waiting for people to come to us and say, we're not losing weight, and then us saying, okay, cut out dairy and see what happens, we were just like, well, let's just put it on the orange list. And then if people are losing weight and everything's great, they can always add it back in. Okay, so limit your dairy, and I promise you, you will increase the likelihood of you getting fantastic results. Then next we have the fruit. Most fruit is high in carbs. Obviously, we wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Some of these fruits are higher in carbs than others, but in general, we want you to limit your fruit intake. And so if you have 2 tablespoons of any of this fruit, or like a half a small handful, you're going to be fine with your carb count. Most fruit sits between like 10 and 20 grams of carbohydrate, and 2 tablespoons of that's going to give you like, 3 or 4, 5 grams of carbohydrate. Remember that your green listed vegetables still contain carbohydrates. And if you follow the green list, you will stay under 50 grams. And that's why a lot of people think the only carbs they're going to get are from the orange list, and then they ramp up their orange listed carbs for the day. But if you add in the carbs you get from the green list, you actually go way over 50 grams. And we want to keep you under 50 grams to get into ketosis and experience all of those benefits. So fruit's pretty straightforward. If it is a fruit and you know it's a fruit, just have 2 tablespoons and leave it at that. Vegetarian proteins. Now, originally, again, in the original Real Meal Revolution, legumes were on the red list. And that was following a lot of the principles behind the paleo diet. And what we found was that a lot of vegetarians really wanted to reduce their weight. Obviously, like obesity is not unique to carnivores. And we found a lot more stuff out about legumes and how the anti-nutrients occur. And basically, if you soak your legumes properly and they are cooked properly, a lot of those phytonutrients, anti-nutrients don't exist. And a lot of the science that's been done on these legumes and pulses was done on eating them raw as grains when they were fed to pigs. So if you take out the fact that they were fed to pigs and raw, and then you consider what the anti-nutrient quantity of these grains or legumes or pulses is when they are soaked properly and cooked normally, they're actually completely safe. So they actually came back onto the orange list, which opens the door for vegetarians to join the Banting diet. Unfortunately, they are the highest source of protein for vegetarians in a lot of cases, and that means that to do this as a vegan, you do generally have to eat more carbohydrates, or your carbohydrate count is actually going to be higher. But that's not the end of the world. At least you're avoiding, gluten, sugar, etc., which is going to be healthier for anyone. Pea protein is probably the only curveball for us, and there was a lot of debate about this internally, because because protein powder isn't really a real food. But we also didn't want to exclude people who had decided to become a vegetarian. A lot of people are vegetarian not for health reasons, but for ethical reasons. And so, pea protein was this compromise on all of our principles to keep it inclusive and say, look, if you are vegan or vegetarian, you are going to need more protein. And so we put pea protein on the orange list. And then processed soy is on the orange list as well for the exact same reason. Okay. Then water, kefir, and kombucha. Now, if you see on the green list, which we'll talk about in another lecture, we've got fertilizers. Now, fertilizers are there because they fertilize the gut. So there's this concept that the gut is like a garden and you need good soil to produce great fruit. And the great fruit of the gut is actually great health. So we need to maintain the soil or this garden in your gut. And we do that by impregnating the gut with good bacteria and then feeding the good bacteria with probiotics. But there are some fermented foods that are better for you than others. And water, kefir, and kombucha, even though they are fermented foods and they do have health benefits, they still contain sugar. If your kombucha tastes sweet, that means that there is what we call residual sugar left in the kombucha. And residual sugar means it's leftover sugar that sits there after the fermentation. Another area you'll get residual sugar is in wine. So any wine that is off dry or semi-sweet, that sweetness comes from the residual sugar. And so you want to stay away from water, kefir, and kombucha, or at least limit it while you're in your weight loss, while you're on the weight loss mission. And finally, starchy vegetables. So these are mostly vegetables that are grown underneath the ground. These vegetables, some of them range from 10, even some under 10 grams of carbs per 100 grams to 25 grams per 100 grams. Those are getting very close to red listed. But in general, if you're staying under 2 tablespoons, your carb count is going to be fine. So the final comment I have here is that originally sweet potato was on the orange list and potato was on the red list. Now, that was based on a lot of, one big study that was done by Lauren Corden, or at least that was made popular by Lauren Corden, who did the paleo diet. And he said, no, you mustn't eat potatoes, you must eat sweet potatoes. And actually the carb count of a sweet potato is higher than the carb count of a normal potato. And there is more fiber in the skin of a normal potato than there is in a sweet potato. A sweet potato is higher in vitamin A, which is important to know. But in general, the study that said that potatoes contained all of these anti-nutrients that were really bad for you, it was a study done on one specific type of potato, which is the potato they use for a lot of crisps, the crisp manufacturing in America. And it was only in the skin and only when prepared a certain way. So in general, that study on that specific potato actually villainized potatoes universally, and that's not the case. So we don't villainize the potato. If you're having a potato and you boil it, or you're turning it into mashed potato, and you have 2 tablespoons of mashed potato with butter and milk in it, or you have sweet potato and your 2 tablespoons of sweet potato, those are remarkably similar. So you don't need to be terrified of the potato. Only be terrified if you're worried about your carb count, and that's why it's on the starchy vegetable list. And you should only really have 2 tablespoons as part of your carb allocation for the day. So that is how the orange list works. That's the approach we want you to take. Be careful, exercise control, and just stick to 2 allocations, one of each of these, or one portion from 2 categories per day. And like I said, coffee is probably a free pass. So if you've got any questions, leave a comment and we'll get back to you. Otherwise, download the lists, stick them up on your fridge, and get cracking. Enjoy your keto transformation. Thanks so much for watching.